Hi class. As promised, here is a brief carving demo video on how to begin the carving process and several different processes to achieve whatever object you are addressing for our three projects. What I have here, I have my cast block. Yours will probably be bigger. This is the block that I cast in the demo for the plaster casting. I'll have a couple of cold steel chisels. You could use any kind of chisel you want. Since the plaster is relatively soft, these chisels are fine. I also have the Surform. This is the one that I own. It is a little bit of overkill for an object of this size, but it will work well. I know how to use it, so it's not going to be an issue for me. I suggest that you guys get the smaller version. This is probably about $15 total. The smaller version is it's a handle this big, but with a rasp that is about this long. So you don't need all of this. It will still work in the same way, so don't worry that I'm using two different size tools. Some other things you could carve with. I have a flathead screwdriver. I do have an old file. Keep in mind that because plaster holds water, all of these tools, if you leave the plaster on them, they will rust. I also have a pocket knife. I recommend, if you have a pocket knife, that it has a liner lock or some sort of lock on it so that when you're using it, it doesn't fold back up on your fingers and cut you. I have my X-Acto blade. You could also use things like, I have some sandpaper. You could use a screw or even a piece of tie wire to get detail work in, things of that nature. I do have a couple of different hammers here, just so you know. This is called a dead blow hammer, meaning it absorbs most of the vibration that is created when you are tapping the chisel. And I do have a regular framing hammer. And this is if you were going at it classically, like you're using a hammer and chisel to carve marble. You would be carving in this direction. It's a little bit of overkill for what we're doing. Because we cast our plaster, and the plaster is more or less a homogeneous mixture, this piece doesn't have any striations. It wasn't created geologically. So it's different than marble or granite or something that comes from the ground, because there can be marble striates and has figuration, and there are weaknesses and strengths in those areas of a chunk of marble. Same thing happens in granite. And the more you use those materials, the more you get to understand what to look for in terms of a weak spot or a hard spot. But with this, we don't have to worry about that. It is pretty easy to move the material around without using a chisel and a hammer. First thing you want to do, though, is sketch your object onto the sides of your block. Remember, we talked, the other videos I posted talked about that as well. And so this is the cast block portion, the bottom of the box that I cast this thing in. And I don't want this texture, this indentation and mold from the box is not going to help me. So I am actually just going to get rid of it. And this is how easy it is. I'm not pushing too hard, but this enables me to keep a flat surface. And all I'm doing is basically a cheese grater. I am keeping my hands out of the way. Obviously, I have to hold the block while I push against it, but I'm not exuding a lot of strength. And you can kind of go back and forth. Moving back like this doesn't really do anything. Pushing it forward is where you are actually creating, you're removing material. Turn it the other way just to get a little bit more of a homogenized texture. texture is gone. It's a relatively flat surface. And I was using, I'm trying to recreate one of these, or at least that was part of my original demo for the paper mache. This is my kind of the object I'm trying to use as a demonstrative tool for you guys. So I would have the side marked out over here, another one over here, same thing here and here, and then the circle, I have it on the bottom. You kind of already see it, but just rough it out. And this makes it so you are not removing too much material, and you kind of keep track of it as you go. I am only noting a small portion of my object for simplicity in terms of this demo. So I would just be doing this top part, the cylinder. Just as a side note, if you know you're going to carve a cylinder, why not cast into a cylindrical form? So, but for our purposes here, this will work great. The best thing to do is kind of clean this out. Your dust will accumulate in here and then on the table, and that's okay. It should not become too airborne, but this is how quickly this stuff comes off. I had the corner there. I have one pass. 2. Turn it up on its side. And I know that I want it to be rounded, so I can just kind of start to push around that corner, and it really removes the material in a pretty controlled way. Now, that's the rough shaping, but it does a lot of the work for you. You can go in with these chisels, or any chisel really, and as the other video I posted from the Irishman, you can push across the surface and remove a pretty good amount of material as you move. The thing is, if you let your plaster sit for a day or two, it will get more dry, which is okay. Just be aware that it's not going to be quite as easy to remove large amounts of material with the chisel. If you are kind of set on trying to use a hammer and chisel situation, you need to get something like a rag or a towel that you can fold up a fair amount and have a good deal of cushion. And you place the object, your plaster block, onto the cloth that's folded up or towel, and then you can take these and just do it. Be smart about it. You know, you're always chiseling away from you. This is with the framing hammer, and you can hear it. Yes, it's moving around, and no, it's not going to be that articulate. You see pieces kind of coming off in chunks. That is because it is plaster and not marble or granite. They would come off in chunks also, but it's more controllable. This can have a tendency to chunk off like that, so it's not the most precise way of doing so. If you have a dead blow hammer, you don't have to buy one of these at all. It's just kind of a handy thing to have around. It doesn't work as efficiently, but it's not as loud. If you had a vise or something like that, you could very gently wrap this around and put it in a vise, and then work on this side, and then turn it and work from the other side and continue to work. Just be aware that you're creating pressure by putting a vise on it, and it gets its structure can be compromised. Working by hand, I think, is probably your best bet. This is called a 5-in-1. This thing is ancient. I've had it for decades probably, and it just has a lot of different areas that you can use to carve and create textures with. Because it's long and it has a fairly sharp edge, you can get some good leverage and start taking off corners. Similar to how the chisels work. But you also have these points here. If I had details that I wanted to work in, I can kind of start to draw those out and create surface indentations and surface textures across any one of these surfaces. So you can see I just carved that line. This is going, I'm working very quickly. You guys should take your time. Say this is a seashell or something like that. And this is not just a drawn crevice, it has an actual slope down and slope back up. But these tools may not provide for the smoothest carving. That's why grab yourself some, this is 220, P220. I just tore off a small piece, and as long as you can feel the sand or the grit or the texture, then it still works, even though it's already been caked up with a lot of plaster. So this will take off some material, but it's more about smoothing things over, diminishing texture that you may not want, things like that. And you can also get into these small surfaces and smooth them out without changing the shape or form that you just created too much. Right? You can curl it up, create a curve at the bottom, and just for demonstration's sake, I'll do the edge here. And this is 20 seconds, 15 seconds of me pushing back and forth, not hard. And you have a good amount of indentation. So you are able to shift and change these things quite a bit, pretty rapidly, but you still have to whittle down and whittle down. And you're taking off small amounts of material at a time so that you don't take off too much. If you take off too much, you have to recast another block and continue with this process, hopefully a little more gently. Your X-Acto blade is very good for finishing touches, smaller detail work, even kind of a line drawing perhaps. It just depends on the texture of your object. For instance, if you have, I don't know, the surface of your original piece just has a very small indentation that is a decorative element, I would use this. If it's a large indentation, then I might go in with my pocket knife and try to get in a little bit more, and then refine with the X-Acto blade, and then refine again with the sandpaper. And then as you're working, your hands move around it, and you will want to go back in and resketch your piece, just again to rough it out. Because once you have the overall shape, you can slow down and then create your detail. But this is still a slow process. Just going to kind of go over these corners so I can show you how quickly you can remove stuff. It feels like you're doing something, because you are, but you still have a lot to do. So, and I know some of you are working in a thinner cylindrical fashion, and you want to be careful on how much pressure you exude when you are using these tools, especially on a thinner piece of plaster. I am also working on top of a piece of plastic so that it's easy for me to clean up. If you do find that this is creating dust in your environment that is airborne, You can also spray it with a spray bottle, water I mean, put water on it. Don't soak it, but just spray it a little bit with water. And that will help keep the dust down. So you can see I have at least diminished these edges down. I'm nowhere close to that. I'm closer. I still have work to do, but the circular shape in there, I'm getting closer to. It's happening on this side too. And then as I hone in, I'm still working this edge, but then I have to think about the thickness, things of that nature. And because I am at the scale I'm working at, I know, especially with all of the plaster dust on this piece, push pins are made by casting two sides of the red form. So you have two sides, they're warm, this thing gets placed in there, and then through heat and pressure, these two sides are clamped on. You can see that on top, where you have this line moving in that direction. Now, because I'm getting so big, I would include that line. That is the mold mark from the manufacturing of this piece. So if you have the wherewithal, that is the kind of detail I would like to see, especially if you're using a smaller object, giving clues as to its manufacturing process or something of that nature. Helps the piece, exist as a carved object in a way that could possibly be believable. So it's up to you to utilize all of these methods the way in which you think you should for your piece. I do want you to experiment also, but don't do so in a way that's going to jeopardize the outcome. Just so you know, a file will do basically the same thing this does, the Surform, but it is much finer, so it won't remove quite as much, but you will have a much smoother surface when you're done. So if you do have a long kind of gradual curve in your piece, then a file is a good last kind of pass to shape it, but also smooth it out, and it will help smooth out the textures created by the Surform. And of course, it gets gummed up too. This, I can't really feel the texture anymore, so you need to clean it out a little bit. And last but not least, you can see my hands are very dusty. This stuff sucks the water right out of your skin. So you can wear these, you can wear whatever gloves you'd like, or you can continue to wash your hands and moisturize. I'm just letting you know that it is going to dry your hands out. Okay, that's about all I've got for this very brief demo on how to carve. Number one thing in terms of safety is I'm not going to actually do it. Do not do this. Always go away from you, okay? That is the number one safety thing. If you don't wear glasses, I do recommend that you wear some safety goggles. And as I said before, gloves of your choosing would help. All right, guys, good luck, and I will see you online.